Welcome to today's Explainer. We're jumping right into something completely counterintuitive today, a really fascinating look at what actually brings us fulfillment in our modern, hyper-optimized lives. We are constantly sold this idea that a frictionless, totally unburdened existence is the ultimate goal. But what if everything we've been taught about finding a meaningful life is just fundamentally backwards? Well, let's dive in.
Right off the bat, there's this striking paradox at the heart of our topic today. The author puts it perfectly. The most meaningful lives I've watched up close weren't the happiest. They were the ones holding weight. We all want our lives to mean something, right? But we usually try to achieve that by shedding our burdens. So what if the burden is actually the point? To really get this, picture this incredible personal anecdote from the author. They took a 2-week, completely unplugged vacation. Phone shoved in a drawer, out-of-office message on, the whole shebang. They fully expected to return to an absolute avalanche of smoldering fires and urgent demands. But instead, they came back to an unexpectedly tidy inbox. A colleague had flawlessly handled all the biggest issues. The place had just hummed along perfectly without them. Now, you'd think they should have felt totally free, right? But instead, they realized that being completely optional felt suspiciously like grief. They had engineered their work life and their personal life to need them as little as possible, and they called it competence.
Okay, moving to section 1. Happiness is just weather. Stop chasing the wrong destination.
So, society is always selling us the idea that continuous happiness is the ultimate finish line. Work hard, buy the nice house, go on the tropical holiday, all so you can finally arrive at happy and just stay there. But here is a really powerful realization. Happiness is just weather. It moves through you. A good morning, a great meal with friends, a beautiful sunset, these are real and they matter, and we absolutely should enjoy them. But you can't live in good weather permanently. It passes. It always passes. And that's not a flaw in your happiness. It's literally just the nature of weather. You simply can't build a stable house out of a passing season.
But our exhausting modern pursuit is all about constantly optimizing for this weather, right? We're always chasing the next good front, the next mood, the next quick dopamine hit. But a life built entirely on feeling good just won't hold still long enough to stand on. People wake up in their 40s or 50s having done all the right things and wonder why nothing is holding together. And the answer? They optimized for the weather and completely forgot to actually build the house.
Let's look at section 2, the architecture of meaning. Partition versus load-bearing. To really wrap our heads around this, we can borrow a brilliant metaphor from structural engineering. Think about a load-bearing wall. In any building, a load-bearing wall holds weight. If you take it out, something above it comes crashing down. Its exact opposite is a partition wall. Now, a partition wall looks totally identical from the hallway. Freshly painted, perfectly nice, but it holds absolutely nothing. You can knock it through on a whim, and the building won't even flinch. The harsh truth here is that most of us have mistakenly spent years turning ourselves into decorative, unnecessary partition walls, all in the name of freedom and independence.
The difference between living these two types of lives is night and day. Just think about the core goal. The partition wall life is all about maximizing your personal convenience, while the load-bearing life is about providing stability for others. Relationships for a partition wall, very transactional, super easy to detach from if things get difficult. But for a load-bearing wall, relationships are entangled and deeply rooted in mutual reliance. If a partition wall is absent, no one really notices, the system just automates around it. But if a load-bearing wall is gone, it is felt deeply. Something structural actually requires rebuilding. Because meaning isn't just a mood you achieve, it's the structural fact of carrying weight.
This brings us to section 3, the Roseto effect, the danger of perfect lightness.
We have quite literally engineered ourselves out of mattering using modern convenience, delivery apps, and this push for extreme self-sufficiency. And you can see the very real-world danger of this in the astonishing history of Roseto, Pennsylvania. Back in the 1960s, researchers noticed the town had remarkably low heart disease, despite the residents smoking, eating badly, and working brutal jobs. So why? Well, it was because they were densely, almost suffocatingly entangled with one another. We're talking 3 generations under one roof, neighbors deeply in each other's business. The load was shared. But watch what happens next. In the 70s and 80s, the younger generation did what we are all taught to do. They moved out to seek cleaner, freer, more independent lives. The town became much less entangled, just matching typical suburban norms. And by the 1990s, the heart attacks arrived exactly on schedule. They cut the load paths, and it actually cost them years of their lives.
And we do a micro version of this every single day. We mistakenly think being unburdened means being free. But just ask anyone who retires into an unexpected silence or gets the perfectly empty calendar they always dreamed of. The promised lightness of an unburdened, untethered life finally arrives, and as it turns out, it weighs a ton. That weightlessness eventually just feels incredibly hollow.
Which leads us to Section 4, choosing to carry weight, what it costs to be a wall.
So, you might be wondering, how do we actually become load-bearing in a world that is actively built for frictionless convenience? Well, first, we have to clarify a really crucial difference: the doormat versus the pillar. Becoming load-bearing, actually, scratch that. It definitely does not mean saying yes to every single request until you crack and collapse into rubble. That's just being a doormat without boundaries. A pillar, on the other hand, deliberately chooses their load. They actively support the roof above them on purpose.
To actually be that pillar, you have to let things rest on you. You need to take on weight you are under absolutely no contractual obligation to take. You have to keep showing up on the gray, exhausted days long after the warm, fuzzy feelings wear off. The author talks about a retired neighbor who has somehow become the person 3 entire streets call when there's a death, a diagnosis, or a crisis. Nobody appointed this guy. He just kept showing up. He carries the worst days of his neighborhood. Now, he isn't necessarily having a happy time, but his life structurally matters. His absence would tear a massive hole in that community.
Because there is a major catch at the center of all this. Meaning and weight are the exact same purchase. You do not get to keep the one without agreeing to carry the other. If your life doesn't need you, sure, you can disappear without consequence. But deep down, our human psychology knows that a life you can vanish from without consequence was never really quite real to begin with.
Okay, so here is a specific, actionable place for you to start. Step 1. Find a single thread in your life that you've been meaning to cut purely for the sake of convenience or a cleaner schedule. Step 2. Don't cut it. Let it hold. Step 3. See what it holds up. Just see what happens when you deliberately allow yourself to be the grounding heaviness for someone else.
And this brings us full circle, right back to the author's opening story about that unplugged vacation. Remember the missing avalanche of work? The author realized they no longer wanted a perfectly frictionless life where their absence goes totally unnoticed. Instead, they wanted an avalanche. Not out of ego, but because a hole left behind is the exact shape of a life that actually held something up. Which leaves us with this final, absolutely vital question to ponder. When you finally step away for good, will there be an avalanche to prove you were here? Chase the good weather, enjoy the happiness when it rolls through, absolutely. But build your house out of something sturdier. Take on the weight. Become load-bearing. Make sure your life unmistakably counts. That's all for today's explainer. Thanks so much for learning with me, and I challenge you to go carry some weight this week.